Let's go ahead and get into chapter 13 of The Borrowers. When we last left off, Arrietty finally was able to get out to put the note that the boy said he would deliver to Uncle Hendreary under the mat. But he was already in trouble for looking under the mats and moving them around. So he was threatened that if he did that again, he'd really get in trouble. Also, Crampfurl thinks that he has a ferret because he saw him out in the countryside shouting down holes for Uncle Somebody. Crampfurl didn't catch who it was, but it was Uncle Hendreary. We know who that's what it was. And so he kind of was suspicious that maybe he has a ferret. Now, a ferret, if you don't know what that is a small kind of a weasel kind of a thing. I don't know. Maybe you can look it up. Some people have them as pets. Apparently they make good pets. I don't know. So, here we go. Continuing on in chapter 13. Homily was ironing, bending and banging and pushing the hair back out of her eyes. All round the room underclothes hung, airing on safety pins, which Homily used like coat hangers. "What happened?" asked Homily. "Did you fall over?" "Yes," said Arrietty, moving quietly into her place beside the fire. "How's the feeling coming?" Remember, she was standing up, trying to listen in on Crampfurl and Mrs. Driver on a stool, pretending to get the feeling of when there's a human around. All right, but really she was just kind of listening in to see what's going on upstairs with the boy. Okay, "How's the feeling coming?" "Oh, I don't know," said Arrietty. She clasped her knees and laid her chin on them. "Where's your knitting?" asked Homily. "I don't know what's come over you lately. Always idle. You don't feel seedy, do you?" "Oh," exclaimed Arrietty, "let me be." And Homily for once was silent. "It's the spring," she told herself. It's the spring, she told herself. Used to take me like that sometimes at her age. Oh, I'm sorry, that's Homily. It's in the same paragraph. It's a little bit confusing. So she'd say, in her own mind, "It's the spring," she told herself. "Used to take me like that sometimes at her age." "I must see that boy," Arrietty was thinking, staring blindly into the fire. "I must hear what happened. I must hear if they're all right. I don't want us to die out. I don't want to be the last borrower. I don't want—" And here Arrietty dropped her face on her knees. "To live forever and ever like this, in the dark, under the floor." "No good getting supper," said Homily, breaking the silence. "Your father's gone borrowing. To her room. And you know what that means." Arrietty raised her head. "No," she said, hardly listening. "What does it mean?" "That he won't be back," said Homily sharply, "for a good hour and a half. He likes it up there, gossiping with her and poking about in the dressing table. And it's safe enough once that boy's in bed. Not that there's anything we want special," she went on. "It's just these new shelves he's made. Well, they look kind of bare. He says, and he says, just pick up a little something." Arrietty suddenly was sitting bolt upright. A thought had struck her, leaving her breathless and a little shaky at the knees. A good hour and a half, her mother had said, and the gates would be open. Remember, Arrietty can't open the gates by herself, but if father's out, you always leave the gates open so you can get quickly back in. "Where are you going?" asked Homily, as Arrietty moved toward the door. "Oh, just along to the storerooms," said Arrietty, shading with one hand her candle dip from the draught. "I won't be long." "Now, don't you untidy anything," Homily called after her, "and be careful of that light." As Arrietty went down the passage, she thought, It is true. I'm going to the storerooms to find another hat pin. And if I do find a hat pin and a piece of string, there won't be any name tape. I still won't be long because I'll have to get back before Papa. And I'm doing it for their sakes," she told herself doggedly, "and one day they'll thank me." All the same, she felt a little guilty. Artful, that's what Mrs. Driver would say she was. There was a hat pin, one with a bar for a top, and she tied on a piece of string very firmly, twisting it back and forth like a figure of 8, and as a crowning inspiration, she sealed it with sealing wax. The gates were open, and she left the handle in the middle of the passage where it could come to no harm, just below the hole by the clock. The great hall, when she had climbed out into it, was dim with shadows. A single gas jet turned low made a pool of light beside the locked front door, and another faintly flickered in the landing halfway up the stairs. The ceiling sprang away into height and darkness, and all around was space. The night nursery, she knew, was at the end of the upstairs passage, and the boy would be in bed. Her mother had just said so. Now, in those days, they would have had gas as light. So you know how some people have gas ovens and the gas comes through? Now that is blue when it comes out because they add something to it. But the gas that would come out of these would be a regular flame, and they would use that for lighting instead of candles before they had electric lights. Arrietty had watched her father use his pin on the chair. A single stairs, in comparison, were easier. There was a kind of rhythm to it after a while. A throw, a pull, a scramble, and an upward swing. The stair rods glinted coldly, but the pile of the carpet seemed soft and warm and delicious to fall back on. On the half landing, she paused to get her breath. She did not mind the semi-darkness. She lived in darkness. She was at home in it. And at a time like this, it made her feel safe. So what she was doing is taking the pin and throwing it up on top of the stairs into the carpet, and it would catch in the carpet, and then she could pull herself up the string, and then she kept doing that for each stair. On the upper landing, she saw an open door and a great square of golden light, which like a barrier lay across the passage. "Oh, I've got to pass through that," Arrietty told herself, trying to be brave. Inside the lighted room, a voice was talking, droning on. "And this mare," the voice said, "was a 5-year-old which really belonged to my brother in Ireland, not my elder brother, but my younger brother, the one who owned a stalemate. And oh, my darling, he had entered her for several point-to-points. But when I say several, I mean 3 or at least 2. Have you ever seen an Irish point-to-point?" "No," said another voice, rather absent-mindedly. "That's my father," Arrietty realized with a start. "My father talking to Great-Aunt Sophie. Or rather, Great-Aunt Sophie talking to my father." She gripped her pin with its loops of string and ran into the light and through it to the passage beyond. As she passed the open door, she had a glimpse of firelight and lamplight and gleaming furniture and dark red silk brocade. Beyond the square of light, the passage was dark again, and she could see at the far end a half-open door. "That's the day nursery," she thought. "Beyond that is the night nursery." "There are certain differences," Aunt Sophie's voice went on, "which would strike you at once. For instance—" Arrietty liked the voice. It was comforting and steady, like the sound of the clock in the hall, and as she moved off the carpet onto the strip of polished floor beside the skirting board, she was interested to hear there were walls in Ireland instead of hedges. Here by the skirting she could run, and she loved running. Carpets were heavy going, thick and clinging. They held you up. The boards were smooth and smelled of beeswax. She liked the smell. The schoolroom, when she reached it, was shrouded in dust sheets and full of junk. Here, too, a gas jet burned, turned low to a bluish flame. The floor was linoleum, rather worn, and the rugs were shabby. Under the table was a great cavern of darkness. She moved into it, feeling about, and bumped into a dusty hassock higher than her head. Coming out again into the half-light, she looked up and saw the corner cupboard with the doll's tea service, the painting above the fireplace, and the plush curtain where her father had been seen. Chair legs were everywhere, and chair seats obscured her view. She found her way among them to the door of the night nursery, and there she saw, suddenly, on a shadowed plateau in the far corner, the boy in bed. She saw his great face turned toward her in the edge of the pillow. She saw the gaslight reflected in his open eyes. She saw his hand gripping the bedclothes, holding them tightly, pressed against his mouth. She stopped moving and stood still. After a while, when she saw his fingers relax, she said softly, "Oh, don't be frightened. It's me, Arrietty." He let the bedclothes slide away from his mouth and said, "Whatty?" He seemed annoyed. "Etty," she repeated gently. "Did you take the letter?" He stared at her for a moment without speaking, and then he said, "Why did you come creeping into my room?" "Oh, I didn't come creeping," said Arrietty. "I even ran, didn't you see?" He was silent, staring at her with his great, wide-open eyes. When I brought the book, he said at last, you'd gone. Oh, I had to go. Tea was ready. My father fetched me. He understood this. Oh, he said matter-of-factly, and did not reproach her. Because, yeah, sometimes parents drag you away, don't they? Did you take the letter? She asked again. Yes, he said. I had to go back twice. I shoved it down the badger's hole. Suddenly he threw back the bedclothes and stood up in bed, enormous in his pale flannel nightshirt. It was Ariette's turn to be afraid. She half turned her eyes on his face. She half turned her eyes on his face and began backing slowly toward the door. But he did not look at her. He was feeling behind a picture on the wall. Here it is, he said, sitting down again, and the bed creaked loudly. Oh, but I don't want it back, exclaimed Ariette, coming forward again. You should have left it there. Oh, why did you bring it back? He turned it over in his fingers. Oh, he's written on it, he said. Oh, please, cried Ariette excitedly. Show me! She ran right up to the bed and tugged at the trailing sheet. Then they are alive. Oh, did you see him? No, he said. The letter was there, just down the hole where I'd put it. He leaned towards her. But he's written on it. Look. She made a quick dart and almost snatched the letter out of his great fingers, but was careful to keep out of range of his hand. She ran with it to the door of the schoolroom, pardon me, where the light, though dim, was a little brighter. It's very faint, she said, holding it close to her eyes. What's he written it with? I wonder. Well, it's all in capitals. She turned suddenly. Are you sure you didn't write it? She asked. Oh, of course not, he began. I write small. But she had seen by his face that he spoke the truth and began to spell out the letters. T-E-L-L, she said. Tell. Y-O-R-E. She looked up. Your, she said. Oh, yes. Yes, said the boy, your. Tell your A-N-T. Aunt, said Ariette. Aunt? My aunt? The boy was silent, waiting. Aunt Lupe, she exclaimed, he says. Listen to this, what he says. Tell your Aunt Lupe to come home. Now notice he didn't spell everything right. Like your should be Y-O-U-R, and he spelled it Y-O-R-E. And aunt should be A-U-N-T, and he spelled it A-N-T, like the bug. That's why Ariette was a little confused. Tell your Aunt Lupe to come home. There was silence. Well, then tell her, said the boy after a moment. Well, she isn't here, exclaimed Ariette. She's never been here. Why, I don't even remember that she looked like. Look, said the boy, staring through the door. Someone's coming. Ariette whipped round. There was no time to hide. It was Pod, borrowing bag in one hand and pin in the other. He stood in the doorway of the schoolroom. Quite still he stood, outlined against the light in the passage, his little shadow falling dimly in front of him. He had seen her. I heard your voice, he said, and there was a dreadful quietness about the way he spoke, just as I was coming out of her room. Ariette stared back at him, stuffing the letter up her jersey. Could he see beyond her into the shadowed room? Could he see the tousled shape in bed? Come on home, said Pod, and turned away. So we'll see if she gets in trouble because she talked to the boy, or maybe Pod didn't notice, and maybe we have to figure out what happened to Aunt Lupe. There's a lot going on.